Welcome to the Cinema Australia podcast with Matthew Eels.
As soon as I got a guitar, I could figure out what the notes were. I'm not good at anything else. Might as well try this music thing.
I was writing songs, I guess from the time I was about 9 years old.
It does do a strange kind of damage being told how good you are. And I'm still called a child prodigy.
I woke up on Saturday morning, there I was on the front page of the paper. A surprise. It was a surprise, wasn't it?
I think the songs are usually a composite of whatever crap I've heard that day.
It's like a sketch, and then you start painting on it. If you can imagine it, you can do it.
It's unlimited up here.
That makes you feel so alive.
Every note's important, and every word is important too.
I remember the first show that I ever played, we were 12. It was in an underground pub. I got paid with a Coca-Cola and a meat pie. And I was like, we've made it.
That's the trailer for The Musical Mind, a portrait in process. Hello and welcome to the Cinema Australia podcast. My name is Matthew Eels. In this episode, I'm joined by internationally renowned filmmaker Scott Hicks for what I consider to be a very special interview. It's interviews like this that are the exact reason I launched Cinema Australia just over 10 years ago. To capture Australian filmmaking stories is what I set out to do, and the stories that Scott shares with us here about his career are priceless. As a keen Australian film enthusiast, I spent most of this interview with my jaw on the floor. Scott even shares stories here which he tells me he hasn't shared before, like the full story behind the making of his unreleased tele-movie Call Me Mr. Brown, and pulling a drunk Bill Hunter into line, respectfully of course. Scott also talks about learning from filmmaking giants like Peter Weir and Bruce Beresford, his creative partnership with Australian acting legend Chris Haywood, and of course we talk about Shine. Scott and I actually got so caught up talking about his career that we almost ran out of time to discuss his latest film, The Musical Mind, a portrait in process. We do get there eventually towards the end of the interview, so if you're here specifically for that, hang in there. An Emmy, Peabody and multiple actor award-winning filmmaker, Scott Hicks has also been nominated for 2 Academy Awards as director and writer for Shine, and British Academy Awards for directing and best film. His documentary on Philip Glass was shortlisted for Oscar nomination and nominated for an Emmy. He was honoured as South Australian of the Year in 1999 and then as Australian of the Year for South Australia in 2008. Scott received a Doctorate of Letters and a Premier's Lifetime Achievement Award. Together with his close friend David Chiem, CEO of global company Mind Champs, Scott formed May 30 Entertainment to create quality entertainment for the international market. The Musical Mind, a portrait in process, marks the first release for May 30. Sparked by the impending 25th anniversary of Academy Award-winning blockbuster Shine, The Musical Mind, a portrait in process, explores the power of the musical brain. Featuring exclusive, intimate footage of superstar international musicians in their private worlds, it opens an intriguing portal into the musical mind. The Musical Mind, a portrait in process, is in cinemas from November 23. You can find more details at cinemaaustralia.com.au. Anyway, enjoy. Scott Hicks, thank you for joining the Cinema Australia podcast. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be chatting with you, so thank you very much.
That's great. Great, Matthew. Good to be with you.
For the past week, I've immersed myself in your work in preparation for this interview. I've sat up until all hours of the morning experiencing some of your films for the first time, like Call Me Mr. Brown, The Boys Are Back, and even Shine, which, as the editor of a publication named Cinema Australia, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say. But I'm of the belief that films come to you when you're meant to watch them. That's been the experience for me anyway.
Right.
It's been an absolute joy immersing myself in your work.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, and I'm glad you've survived it so far.
I can assure you it was easy to survive, and I watched some of these films with my partner as well, and we both walked away saying, "Wow, we've really learnt a lot here, and we enjoyed what we watched." But I'm looking forward to hearing some stories about those films, and I'm really looking forward to chatting about your newest film, The Musical Mind: A Portrait in Progress. So again, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to join us.
Terrific, thank you.
So before we do chat about those films, I want to go back to the very beginning for you. You were born in Uganda and moved to England at the age of 10 before moving to Australia when you were 14. Take us back to your days growing up in Kenya and in England. Were film and music already a big part of your life then?
Absolutely not. There was in Kenya in those days there was no television, and there was very little cinema. So I mean, I have recollection of the first film I ever saw was that wonderful film called The Red Balloon, about a little boy in Paris with his pet balloon. And seeing that at the Nairobi Drive-In is an early recollection for me. And then, of course, but once I was at boarding school, which was from the age of 6, there was just very little audiovisual stimulation. I mean, it was just a fact of life. And then going to boarding school in England pretty much followed suit, in the sense that the only films we saw usually had Laurence Olivier in them, working his way through the Shakespearean canon, and watched on a sort of a rattling 16mm projector in the school assembly hall, that kind of thing. And so film and cinema were just totally removed from my world. And as a family, we might venture in England, up to London once a year to the latest James Bond film or David Lean or, some great moment. But regular cinema going wasn't a thing until it really started for me when I started at Flinders University when I was 16. I stumbled into the world of film. It was an absolute sort of accident. I had wanted to study English and history as my majors, but they wouldn't let me do a humanities and a social science, so I had to choose another humanities subject to go with my English. And I just chose this thing called drama because it thought, read a few plays and that'll be that. But it buried deep in the drama course was this topic called filmmaking. And guess what? That was the portal to the rest of my life. I had a little sense of it then, but I walked through that door and it led me into this world that I've occupied ever since.
Was there a particular moment or during that where you knew, like, this is the career for me? I mean, because you said that you were 16, it's quite a developed age. I didn't know what I wanted to do at that age, but was there a particular moment for you?
No, I don't. Well, I never associated it with something that you would do for a living.
Yeah.
It was just simply the most fun thing to do with your friends. Yeah. And there was a bit of equipment, that we got access to, and all, Bolex cameras with sort of 16mm black and white film, and you'd get a bunch of friends together and go out and shoot a few scenes and make a movie. And I spent most of my honors years making one particular film that was almost feature length, which was sort of unheard of, which was just like adolescent rambling through cinema. So, it was I'd seen by then a great diet of European cinema, all the great Italian sort of neo-realists and the new wave that was coming out of France. And so there were a lot of exciting things happening in the world of cinema. But it was just, that's what was going on, And so in the film sort of regurgitated a lot of those ideas or approaches. I was fascinated with German expressionism and the use of the image to convey emotion. Not dialogue wasn't so important. It was more the power of the image.
Yes.
That stayed with me. That particular thing. So yeah, it was. I think my parents wondered what on earth I was doing. They were never tried to sort of discourage me, but I think they thought I wasted a lot of time going to the cinema and watching television.
Well, thankfully you did, because look what we've got now. Now, that film that you mentioned just then, was that The Wanderer?
Yes, it was. Yes. Where on earth did you hear of that?
It's on your. It is online somewhere.
Right.
I actually couldn't watch it, but it is noted online. It was a film that I wished was available to watch online. Do you have a copy of it somewhere? Is it stored safely?
It's stored in a dark vault where no one can view it. No, I have a DVD of it. I mean, look, there's some scenes in it which I think, oh wow, I got that right.
Yes,
but there's a lot of. It's a very, it was an adolescent sort of regurgitation of things that I'd seen in cinema, but it was, it was the fact that it became such an obsession to make it, and I had to get the money together to make it because the resources at the university were very slender.
Yes.
And, I had to find other people that would put money into this. And that led me to all sorts of things. And I, realized that it was those days, it was the early years of the Whitlam government. We're talking early 70s.
Yeah.
And there was more money being put into the arts. And incredibly, a man who was the chair of the version of whatever it was called, the Australian Film Commission of those days, came to talk to us students at Flinders and tell us that, you could apply for grants to make films. And this man's name was John Murray. And he was a renowned film director at the time.
Yeah.
He was married to a woman called Gillian Murray. And she later became Gillian Helfgott.
Right. Wow. Unbelievable.
Well, it was extraordinary. I mean, of course, no sense of that at the time whatsoever.
Yes, yeah.
Through the vagaries of life, that I, ended up making a film about David and Gillian. It's just, it's a bit of a mind bend.
I am sitting here right now with my mind absolutely blown. I can't believe that you've just shared that story with us. That's incredible.
No, it was certainly something. And then, that sort of was my graduation film, as it were, for my honours degree. I spent so much time and effort on it that I didn't do all of the paperwork that I was meant to have done.
Right.
The drama faculty were kind enough, or generous enough, or maybe they recognized there was something going on, where they apportioned certain sections of the film in lieu of written work that should have been handed up for the German expressionist thing or whatever it was. We called that part of The Wanderer German expressionism. And so it was broad-minded of them, and I got my honours degree, and that was that.
Wow.
And then what? I mean, I was out in the world, and I just wanted to make another film. So I did. I went, collaborated with a couple, particularly close friend of mine, Kim Mackenzie at Flinders. He later became a renowned ethnographic filmmaker based out of Canberra. And we set about pulling together money to, make a film. And again, there was a link that happened out of this, which was a project officer that I had to deal with for a grant that we got from the Film Commission, or whatever they were called back then. Was a woman called Jane Scott. Now, Jane later became the producer that I asked to work with me on Shine.
Wow.
So again, these links, these connections that you make sort of in an you never know where something is going to lead, you know?
No, that's true. That's true. And, Australia is a huge country, but when it comes to this film industry, it really is quite small and compact, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's sort of that led to, because I remember one, I got a call from Jane one day on that film that we were making, which was called the Peregrine. We called it Down the Wind in the end.
Oh,
And,
yes. Yeah.
and she asked something like, she said, you haven't bought a new Volvo, have you? I was like, what? I drove an old Volkswagen. And I said, no, what are you talking about? She said, oh, someone's just gone and spent their grant on a new Volvo, and we're trying to work out who it is.
Oh, unbelievable. Who was it? Did they find out?
No, I never did find out. But, so that was that. And then then an amazing thing happened, which was Premier Don Dunstan, the sainted Don, as I think of him, among his many, many initiatives in the world of arts and culture in South Australia in the 70s, decided we were going to have this thing called a film corporation.
Yes.
Which, there weren't any of those, so nobody really knew what it was. And that was just around the time that I was, graduating out of Flinders. So just amazing sort of opportunity opened up in the sense that, Dunstan created a portal,
Yes,
and what it meant was that filmmakers, the great filmmakers of the day came to live in Adelaide. Peter Weir, Bruce Beresford, and they made films here. And people had to, you could scrabble to get a job on the crew in whatever capacity.
Did you do that?
I did.
Yeah,
I worked on several films of those great directors. I worked, as an assistant, and became an assistant director, which is a very humble position. Third assistant director. I worked my way up the ladder to become a first assistant director over the years, which I did with Bruce Beresford on his last Australian movie before he went off to make Tender Mercies.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
I think that's right. But anyway, look, it was a film called The Club, and it was about an Aussie rules football club written by David Williamson.
Yeah.
And I was first assistant director on that. I mean, when you work closely to such, enormously talented and experienced people, it's like a living film school.
Yes. Yeah.
And you learn things you could never learn at school just by being there and seeing and absorbing it. And that was.
Do you remember some of those things that you learnt at the time?
Oh my God, yes. Absolutely. In fact, I had with Peter, I had this amazing experience, which was one day I was in the production office and Peter was talking to the producer, Matt Carroll, and he said, I want someone to videotape rehearsals I'm doing with the main cast, the main couple in the film. This was a little tele-movie he was making called The Plumber. And he said, I need someone with a camera, and we'll just, get a room somewhere and we'll, I want him to film rehearsals and so I can see what's happening on the camera. And Matt, producer, said, what producers very often do, we haven't got any money for that. We haven't got any money to hire a cameraman. Yeah. And I was just standing over doing some photocopying or something. And Peter looked around and said, well, what about Scott? And Matt said, oh, well, sure, there's always Scott, So he said, well, he'll do, come on. And I spent 2 days or 3 days, I can't remember exactly, in a room with Australia's premier film director, working with his 2 lead actors. Yeah. And my job was to film them.
Yeah.
And so he just wanted me to film whatever was happening, but I got into it a bit.
Your director instincts kicked in.
I was shooting over the shoulder stuff, and he looked at what I was doing. He said, "You're getting into this, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, but it was like a first-hand masterclass.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't buy that.
People could only dream of having those experiences.
Absolutely. And I mean, some nowadays, of course, with attachments and and so on, it is possible, which is terrific. But there was no formality for that back in those days. The thing was that Peter was of that generation that had to invent the process of filmmaking themselves, because as he said, when he received his honorary Oscar, hugely deserved, 5-time nominee, I think he was, for an Oscar, and he was given an honorary Oscar. And in his speech there, he said that they had no forebears, there were no predecessors for his generation of filmmakers, because there had been no film industry for years. Right. And they had nobody whose knee they could sit at to learn from. They had to make it up. Well, he was my predecessor. You know, I was at his knee learning. Do you know what I mean? It was a really powerful thing.
Scott, what an experience that must have been for you, and what a film school.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had other graduates of of AFTR's early graduates, very early graduates, like Phil Noyce. And Phil Noyce said to me one day, well, you were so lucky you got to work with these directors. He said, because the first time I walked onto a movie set, he said, I had no idea how anybody really went about it.
Yes, yeah.
You know, so
incredible. I want you to take us back to your music video days as well here, because your first gig making music videos, who was it for, and how did that come about? Who was the band?
Well, that came about because I was asked that after I made one of the great things the South Australian Film Corporation was made to do at the outset by Dunstan was they had to offer all government film work had to be offered out to be tendered on by the private sector.
Wow. Okay.
Now this meant that I just formed a little company with a colleague, and we put in bids onto scripts that would be issued out. You know, like we need to make a 15-minute film on, you know, spot welding or artesian bores or something. We avoided those, but sometimes there were films that required actors. Or were films to do with art, and those were the ones that we focused on. So I'd made a number of short films and short sponsored documentaries, and out of that, my work sort of got noticed. And one day, out of the blue, I was offered a script for a feature film called Freedom for the South Australian Film Corporation. Now, you know, no South Australian had directed a feature film for decades. Wow. Going back to the 50s or something. So this was an amazing thing. And I was 27 years old or something. And it was like, wow, incredible. So I made this film, which was, the content wasn't necessarily what I would have sought out.
Yes.
It was such an opportunity. And the soundtrack for the film was created by Don Walker, Cold Chisel.
Yes.
And Don said to me, look, I think with the opening track for the movie, I think we need a vocal in that. And I was saying, oh, really? Oh, I like the song as it is. He said, no, look, I'm going to use this young singer from Perth called Michael Hutchins.
Yeah.
And that's how we connected. Michael sang the opening track to Freedom. And then I was asked to make a little clip with Michael to publicize the film. Yeah. And the manager of In Excess at that time watched me working with Michael, and Michael was really responsive, you know, to direction. I was directing him, you know, I wasn't just pointing a camera. I'd be asking him to do certain things, you know, or do certain thing another way, and he could do it. And this guy watched me doing this and said to me, I want you to make 3 clips for In Excess. We've got this new album coming out, and I want you to do 3 clips. I want them all to be absolutely different to each other. Get these, I'll give you the tracks. Anyway, it was another door. I had no idea what to do, but never say no.
No, that's right. That's right.
Just say yes, and then figure it out. So that's what I did. We did these 3 clips. One of them sort of went ballistic in the sense that it helped to break In Excess into the American market, because it was first viewing of them on the then nascent MTV.
Yeah.
And even a minute of it was shown on the CBS News or something to 70 million people. So it was like a breakthrough for them, and a learning curve for me. You know?
Now, was this before Richard Lowenstein took over making music videos for NXS, or did you feel like you were taking work away from Richard?
I think he'd done stuff possibly even before that. I can't remember, but and certainly did stuff after that. I never heard from them again.
Yeah.
I mean, I made these 3 clips for next to nothing.
Yeah.
But it was a fabulous experience. I really enjoyed it. But not until I was nominated for an Academy Award did I hear from them.
Yes, right. Interesting. And what was that for?
Well, that was for Shine.
Right.
Oh,
yes. No.
What
was
no, they just said congratulations.
Right. Okay. Oh, fantastic. That's these stories. I can't believe some of these stories that you're sharing with me at the moment. They're just unbelievable. And I'm sure you've told these stories before, but it's
not
so,
all of them. Some of them
no
come to mind. So yeah.
Fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, I've watched quite a few of your films over the last week, and I would have loved to have watched The Wanderer, which we just spoke about, but it is impossible to find. So I did start with Call Me Mr. Brown, which I really, really enjoyed. Australian films like that are the exact reason that I started the Cinema Australia and the Cinema Australia podcast, because I would love to have been able to listen to an in-depth interview with, say, yourself and Chris Haywood at the time about the making of this film. I'm wondering, was Call Me Mr. Brown well received at the time, or what was that experience like?
Well, what was amazing was that, freedom came and went very quickly.
Yeah.
It didn't make much impact. You know, some people liked it. A lot of people never saw it. That's what happened. So I didn't know, it was supposed to, I thought, I'd roll on to another fabulous offer or something, but no, that didn't happen. So I had to figure out, well, what am I going to do? And I stumbled on this story of the Qantas bomb hoax in a book of great Australian crimes. And it was fascinating. And how this man had completely hoodwinked Qantas with, a terrible plot that he had, which was that he'd put a working altimeter bomb on a plane that had taken off for Hong Kong. And what stopped it being just a kind of sounded like a crazy tale was that he showed them or told them where to find a replica of the bomb that he had said he'd put on the plane.
Yeah.
And in this locker at Mascot Airport was a working altimeter bomb. And that put the fear of God into everybody.
Yes, yeah.
The plane was 7 hours in the air while they ripped the aircraft apart looking for this so-called bomb hidden. Yeah. So this was an amazing story, which all ended happily ever after in the sense the plane ultimately landed. It was a hoax.
Yes.
A hoax. But what he demanded was $500,000 in cash, which in those days was like 10 million, or more, I don't know. But and he wanted it in cash, and he wanted it handed over on the front steps of Qantas House at 6:15 in the evening, in the middle of the rush hour. And he would give them the whereabouts of the bomb so that it could be disarmed and the plane could land. The core of it was the phone conversations that he did from various phone boxes all around Sydney, as you know from seeing the film. But they are verbatim from the transcripts of the actual phone conversations.
Unbelievable.
Turned up in the research. And it was a black comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable dialogue between this sort of kind of hopeless criminal and a terrified Qantas that wanted nothing but the safety of their passengers.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I've rambled on so much.
No.
But the thing was that we wanted to be responsible. We went to Qantas and said, look, we're going to make this film about this incident. And Qantas just didn't want to know about it. They just ignored us. We tried repeatedly to say, look, can you brief us on security and tell us if there's things you don't want us to show or there's whatever. So they would not respond. I talked to many, many people who were working for them at the time or had worked. I spoke to the pilot of the aircraft. I spoke to the person who had been the head of Qantas at the time, who actually handed over the money. And, you know, it was, we were really diligent, but nothing, they wouldn't help us.
Yeah.
So eventually we raised the money to make this film. I mean, and we started shooting, and some money was being invested from South Australian sources, government money. And so Qantas sent a delegation to Adelaide to monster the Premier, then John Bannon. They said to him, you have to stop this film. It's a security risk. It's got your government money in it, and you must stop it.
What were they so worried about?
Well, they were, terrified of a repetition, like a copycat thing.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Something of that order. And, but he looked them in the eye and he just said, I've got to remind you, gentlemen, we live in a thing called a democracy here.
Yes.
And we're not in the habit of banning films.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, you can get lost. So they were sent away with their tail between their legs. So their next move was to contact us, the filmmakers, and say, how much will it cost us to buy this whole film off you when you've done it?
Without being released.
They were going to get rid of it. They were going to, burn it. So we gave them a number. And now we'd become Mr. Brown. I mean, it's like now we were sort of demanding money. But
what was the number? Are you happy to share that, or do you remember?
Look, the film cost about $937,000 from memory.
Wow!
So we said to them, it's about $1 million is what it'll set you back.
Yeah.
They realized that this was a really stupid idea, but their way of dealing with it was to again shut up shop and not deal with us.
Yes, yeah.
But what happened was that they instead went to Network 10, who had a pre-sale on the film, which was part of the financing structure, and they threatened them with that they would remove all their advertising and contra from the network if they ever screened the movie.
Unbelievable.
So we delivered the finished film, and it was never screened.
Unreal.
It's never been screened in Australia, and it was nominated.
Hang on. Still to this day, never been screened.
To this day, to my knowledge, it's never been screened. I mean, I haven't watched every minute of Network 10 for the last 40 years, but unless they buried it at midnight sometime. But, it's been seen all over the world, everywhere. It was bought in Israel, for example, and screened there. And you can't say that's a country that is without security risks.
No.
So this was absurd, and in its turn, 10 said to us, we're not going to pay you properly. We're only going to pay you part of what we said we'd pay you because we can't screen the movie. Yeah. And I said, that's not our fault.
Yeah.
You owe us, this is a contract. You owed us this money. Anyway, I had to fight tooth and nail. We eventually got the money out of them, but the film was buried. And it was amazingly, though, nominated as best tele-movie in the AFI, then AFI Awards.
Yes. Yeah. And so who submitted it? Who submitted it to the AFIs at the time?
We submitted it.
Right.
You could submit your film. They could. The film in those days didn't have to have necessarily been seen by that stage.
Yeah.
But there it was, one of 4 tele-movies in that year, and it was the year that Jane Campion won with 2 friends.
Unreal.
But absolutely unreal. So there, my second film just had disappeared without trace, like my first.
Oh, this is just insane. This is crazy.
Like, well, where is this taking me? I don't know. We're in the mid-80s now, and it's like I've gone nowhere.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Cinema Australia podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or at cinemaaustralia.com.au.
I want to ask you about Chris Haywood and your relationship with Chris, because he played the lead in this film, obviously, Peter.
He's stunning in it. I think he's absolutely amazing.
He's so good in this. And you talk about black comedy. This is the black comedy role of the lifetime. He's so good in that. Both yourself and Chris would go on to make quite a few films together. The earliest one that I can tell that you worked on was No Going Back in 1981. But tell us about your friendship with Chris and where that began.
Well, it grew out of those sponsored documentaries that the South Australian Film Corporation was making. And as I said, I chose films that involved actors. Now, I thought, well, let's try and get really good actors if we can, because I wanted to learn. How do you do? How do you talk to an actor? How do you direct someone?
Mm-hmm.
So where possible, I contacted, the greatest management company in Australia, which is Shanahan Management. And in those days, it was Bill Shanahan who ran that company. It was his company. And I remember calling him as a, ingenue, saying, look, I'm doing this little documentary here that's got, I really like Chris Haywood. Is there any chance that he could, could we afford to have him work with us for a few days? And Bill would say, well, let's ask him. And they found, like Chris would have a few days off between some bigger projects. He was already a, major actor, mid-70s. And so he would come down to Adelaide, work with me for a few days. And boy, he was like, you just learned so much from having an actor of his caliber. And it really, so anyway, that's how I sort of started to cut my teeth in directing actors. Did a couple of things with Chris. And then eventually when it came to having Call Me Mr. Brown, I mean, we already had a rapport, and he knew, I think he figured Chris is an actor. The way I read it back then was he was always so well prepared with his ideas in case the director was a blithering idiot. He would never look bad. That's why one of his secrets is he never looks bad in anything.
No, that's very true. That is so true.
So and as an example, on the first scene I directed him in, he went, you had to walk to the back of this car and put something in the back of a car. And he said, this dialogue's no good. It's finished. By the time I get to the car, the dialogue's finished. What's going on? Why you don't want to do it? I said, hang on, Chris. No. You don't start the dialogue until you get to the car, right? So that's direct. That was the first little bit of directing,
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, right. Okay, fine. Great. So, but the thing was, it was about learning and responding, and, it gets more sophisticated than that. But in simple terms, it was like, talk to your actors.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell them what you're thinking, because they can't read your mind,
Yeah.
And so we had a great rapport after that. So when it came to Call Me Mr. Brown, I thought, my God, Chris would be amazing. And he jumped at it. He loved it.
Fantastic. Yeah.
He loved it.
Yeah.
He was fantastic.
He really does make this film. And
astonishing.
Other than being, this great entertaining film overall, something else that stood out for me was this big booming performance by the late great Bill Hunter. His performance here as Detective Sergeant Jim Jack McNeil, it's quite an aggressive one. He's a very angry character here. So I'm wondering what was it like to work with Bill on this film? Was his character as angry as Bill had portrayed him?
Yeah, pretty much. I think, the thing was, he was playing a senior sort of New South Wales cop in an era when there was a great deal of corruption and some very poor policing back in those days. So and really it was monumental incompetence on the day that let Macari, the hoaxer, drive away from the front steps of Qantas House in the rush hour with $500,000 in cash.
Yes.
And not be able to tail him. They just completely failed. They got stuck in a lift. It was a total, it's a French farce.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, Bill was my dream for this character, and I couldn't believe it when he accepted the part. And the whole, I had a superpower cast.
Yes. But
Bill had. Bill was known. He was a big time drinker, and I say this with all due respect. He was such a great actor. But one particular morning, I went in to the studio where we were shooting these scenes, and this uproarious laughter coming from the makeup room. And I went through there, and Bill was there, and he was off. He was blind drunk, and
wow.
made up. This was like 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh no.
And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Anyway, I asked everybody to leave, and it was really difficult, but because I was just a young whippersnipper sort of director with long hair that just, with this legend of Australian cinema. I said to him, Bill, I wrote this part with you in mind. I thought if I could have the great Bill Hunter play this part, it would be a really meaningful thing. It is incredibly important to me that we get this right, And he said to me, no one's ever talked to me like that before.
Wow.
And I didn't, at the first I thought, oh, Christ, he's going to hit me. And anyway, he called for he wanted black coffee. He said, can you give me some time? I said, yeah, I'll give you time. We've got other things to do.
Yeah.
And he pulled himself together. And it really meant something, because sometimes you have to bite that bullet. It's a really tough thing.
Yeah.
And I knew, but he was a pugnacious chap. I mean, I loved him. But it was I had worked on a film that he was cast in. I'd worked as an assistant director on a film, and one day, what I knew about this pugnacity thing was that I had to go and I forget exactly what it was. I had to knock on his door and give him a fresh call sheet or something or other. I was just a functionary on the film. He answered the door and in his cups, and I gave him the call sheet, and he said, "That's great, mate." And he grabbed and he headbutted me, bang. Like, oh. So that's what I knew he could do.
Wow.
It was just like, it was a sign of affection, I think.
Yeah. And a great lesson there for other directors who are listening to this about you taking that time to speak to Bill about what you wanted as a director, and what you expected from him.
It was a critical moment.
Yeah.
Because he knew that I was serious in intent.
Yes.
And because I was, before, one of the difficulties I had was that we weren't able to have any rehearsal time before we started shooting, because the actors were all busy people and they were available, So in those days, it was very much in vogue to have workshops, workshops, and I'm thinking, oh God, I can't workshop my actors,
Yes.
So on the day one of shooting, you're shooting scenes, you're rehearsing on the set. And that's actually become my habit ever since, by the way. Very little rehearsal beforehand.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to Bill, oh God, I'm so sorry we weren't able to workshop this scene. And he said, listen, mate, who wants to fucking workshop the director's insecurities for days? I went, oh, yeah, right, okay. He was a great man, a great actor, and I don't wish him any disrespect. His legacy is enormous and doesn't need me to say. So my tales are just about a stumbling young director really trying to come to terms with a monster talent of the Australian industry.
Yeah. Now, are you happy for us to let listeners know that the film is available to watch on YouTube if they want to watch it?
Yeah, they can until I take it down.
Yes. I noticed.
Look, catch it while you can.
Yes, catch it while you can. Yeah, that's right. So let's move on from that film and jump into this absolute masterpiece that is Shine, because it does play into the musical mind quite a bit. There's really not a lot to be said about this film that you wouldn't have spoken about already, but I do have a few questions about it. Firstly, does it feel like it's been 25 years?
It's unbelievable, but life's a bit like that. You turn around and a quarter of a century's passed.
Yes.
So no, it was, but obviously it's been the thing that has defined my career, ever since. And something that I remain immensely proud of, because it grew out of a chance meeting, with a pianist who was passing through town in 1985, the year that I made Call Me Mr. Brown.
Yeah.
A little story in the paper. This pianist was recovering from illness, and I used to go to classical concerts, so I went to see him perform, and it was the most amazing performance I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I just went up to him and Gillian, erstwhile wife of John Murray, had married David, and I said to them, "What's the story?" And that's where it began. But it took 10 years to actually make the film.
Make it, yeah.
It was 1995 before I was shooting it.
Mm.
Nobody wanted to know about it. It was like nobody. That was, you could clear a room by walking in with a gun. Oh, here he comes with that stupid piano story of his again.
Really? Is that what it was
like?
like?
No. It was like, it was just impossible. It was like, whatever. It was, nobody. Who's going to be interested in a character who doesn't control his destiny? And none of us really control our destiny.
No. The film was life-changing for you. Did it feel like an Oscar-worthy film while you were making it? Did it have that kind of buzz on set?
It didn't. No, I mean, Oscars were not a thing that anybody ever even thought about in those.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like another planet. On another planet. It was nowhere in your mind. You wouldn't even dream of what was then AFI awards or something. The objective was just to make the best film we possibly could with the money we had. And everything else flowed from that. It was from having a vision and organizing and executing it as best you could with a really great crew of people, a fantastic cast. I mean, really, it was obviously a powerful experience, but it was the culmination of everything I knew about filmmaking to that point in time.
Yes.
I've done a lot of documentary work in the interim, very big documentary work. I'd won an Emmy for one, series I'd made for Discovery Channel. I'd moved on down a path of telling factual stories, and this was a dramatically interpreted history of a person's life. Seven nominations came down down the phone line, as it was in those days, from via Fine Line, the people who'd bought the film, which had caused a riot at Sundance, and I mean a riot. And thwarted the even then legendary, if not notorious, Harvey Weinstein. And it was a topsy-turvy, life-changing experience, which propelled a number of us involved with the film into another stratosphere.
I guess the one thing that, again, I'm going to ask you about somebody's particular performance here, but I guess the one thing that really jumped out of the screen for me, seeing it with fresh eyes, was Noah Taylor's performance as the adolescent David. He is so unbelievably impressive here. And I was almost disappointed to see him switched out by Jeffrey Rush. And that's not taking anything away from Jeffrey's performance here, obviously, which certainly is Oscar worthy. But I just thought that Noah's performance here, it was just unbelievable. Was it always the plan to have two actors play David in his later years?
Yes, it was. And it was a dilemma. It was a huge dilemma of how to do it. And even when I decided on Noah, I mean, Jeffrey I had decided on, and Jeffrey hadn't done hardly anything in film. I think he was like the second detective in the alley or something like that. But it was the script of a lifetime for him, obviously. And but then there was that, there was the adolescent David through to the young adult. That was really difficult because Jeffrey was more mature than that. You couldn't have him playing that young. And I said to Liz Mulliner, who was our casting agent there, brilliant person. I said, I think I want Noah Taylor. She said, you can't possibly. No one's ever going to believe Noah Taylor is a young Geoffrey Rush.
Yeah.
Look at them together. Look at their photo. She put 2 photos. I said, yeah, but Liz, they're never going to see them together.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And it's the illusion is up to me how I convey that, or how we get Noah to begin the process of disintegration of speech patterns and so on that will be picked up and riffed on by Geoffrey.
Yes.
So I say riffed on, but it was all scripted. And based, on recorded conversations with David Helfgott, which I have to tell you, underneath my computer where I'm sitting now is a plastic box, and in it is a box which says Helfgott Research Tapes, which are the original audio cassettes of my conversations with David Helfgott.
Oh, wow.
Years ago. For some reason. Right here. Anyway,
please keep those safe.
Well, they're going to the South Australian Library has acquired my archive, and
great.
Which they're thrilled about, and they're sort of processing and curating materials, and so all of these things will end up in that archive.
Yes.
Because really, it includes the whole history of the development and creation of Shine.
Oh, that's great to hear. Now, am I exaggerating here when I gush about Noel's performance?
No, I don't think you are. I think it's an absolute,
great.
No, totally. Look, and at the time, the dilemma for Fine Line was, who do we promote for the Academy Award? And I was a complete babe in the woods. I said, why did you promote both of them? They said, because it'll split the vote. And neither will get it.
Yeah.
So, and anyway, I just didn't fully believe that this thing was going to go to the Oscars.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seemed totally, it just wasn't in my frame of reference. So anyway, they ended up, Geoffrey did a tremendous amount of publicity work and so on in America, and and it ended up, with him getting the nomination.
Fantastic. Now you mentioned this name here. I didn't know if I wanted to mention it or not. I didn't know if we'd had enough time, but obviously a few films later was The Boys Are Back, and that was made with Harvey Weinstein as producer. Are you happy to talk to us a bit about working with Harvey on that film?
Well, Harvey wasn't involved with it. I mean, it was Miramax, certainly.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, I've got a bunch of Harvey stories, but
everybody does, and it's interesting how. Yes, yeah.
But it was interesting ending up working with Miramax on another film, but it was still an Australian production. So the producers were actually Tim White, Anyway, so it was another word. I don't know that Harvey had anything to do with it now that I think about it.
Good. Well, that's actually a good thing, because I've spoken to other filmmakers who, did work with him on movies, and it wasn't a pleasurable experience at all. In particular,
Harvey Scissorhands, I think.
Yes. It was Jill Bilcock actually who shared some wild stories about Harvey with me, and I think she called him a monster, which was very honest of her.
He was perceptive. I mean, he was. Look, I had meetings with him. He really wanted me to work, do films for Miramax after Shine. I mean, he really wanted Shine. That was it. Right. But I mean, they had failed to enter into any negotiation with us before making the film. But they were shown the film before it was ever offered to anyone else.
Interesting.
And they just did nothing. Yeah. And so. In the end, Fine Line put a huge amount of energy and huge resources behind it. And they really wanted to thwart Harvey, who was king of the ring at that time. So there was quite a story there, but meeting him was, it was wrong. Look, he was a remarkable person in the sense he was absolutely passionate about film, but he had a tremendously bullying nature. Literally, when we sat down to talk, I mean, I had tried over and over again to get Miramax involved. Flew to Los Angeles. We tried every which way to get them engaged. They just ignored us. And So I told him all of this, and I said, when we sat down to actually meet, I said, I've got to tell you that. He said, shut up. He said, you listen to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is an interesting relationship. And then he blew off this whole thing about how we should be going with Miramax because of blah 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 blah, and then he petered out eventually. And I said, "Is it my turn? I get to talk now?" He said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." But yeah, he had that bluster, but there was a passion.
Yes.
For filmmaking,
and
then there was all this other stuff clearly going on. You couldn't begin to guess at, but
yeah. I could obviously ask you a million more questions about your entire career, but we really should move on to talking about The Musical Mind, a portrait in process. That's what we're here to discuss, even though, it's almost been an hour now. But let's
oh my
jump
God,
into
I didn't
this
realize. I've talked too much.
No, you haven't. So the documentary is a fascinating look into the creative processes of some very fascinating musicians. Firstly, this is the first film produced under your new production company, May 30 Entertainment. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Yeah, it's really interesting development, which we've established with David Chem, is an erstwhile actor who was Australia's first Asian TV star, actually, as a teenager, having escaped from Vietnam in a leaky boat, and David's gone on to become a huge sort of international entrepreneur based in Singapore, with an everlasting interest in film and having graduated from AFTRS and so on. And we just have a really deep friendship that stretches back 30 plus years. And we've joined forces in this May 30 Entertainment. And The Musical Mind is the first product of that relationship.
Where I'm curious to know about the name May 30. Where did that come from?
Oh, it's just something that is important between our families, really.
Oh,
it's
great.
Yeah, just you go through so many permutations of company names. And most of them are unobtainable because somebody else has them.
Yes. Documentaries like this one, are they what you plan to make under this banner, or what are some of the other productions that you want to make?
The intent is to make films what we think of as real stories. I mean, stories, a lot of them probably based on real life, as many of my films have been, but real stories with heart. Sort of, I mean, Shine as a sort of example in the sense of light at the end of the tunnel. In other words, they can be very difficult, they can be very dark, but there has to be some redemptive element that takes you out of the cinema with some positive view of life. And so that's really the spirit of what we're trying to do. And The Musical Mind is the first kind of representation of that in a documentary form. But others will be dramatic feature films and so on, which we have in development.
That's very exciting to hear. The Musical Mind is a family affair, actually. I was interested to read, having been co-written and co-produced by your son Jet and co-produced by your wife Kerry. How did this one come about for the three of you together?
Well, it just made sense. I mean, Kerry's been producer on numerous films of mine. Jet was a professional touring musician, rock and roll musician for years, and is then now actually working with one of David Chem's companies in Singapore.
Wow.
The company's based in Singapore, but has been included in this whole development of this May 30 concept. So it made absolute sense that he was integrally involved and worked really closely with me in the scripting and in the process of working with the various musicians that we encountered. It was so good to have another working musician who could understand their life and the complexities of their lives.
Did you learn anything from working with Jet on the film?
Absolutely. I mean, I learned a lot in terms of sort of immediacy of the conversation and just he has a tremendously positive manner of always looking forward, never looking back and never regretting, well, I wish we'd done that. Or it's always, what's the next thing we're going to do, which I think is a really powerful force.
Australia is filled to the brim with world-class musicians, musical talent across all genres. Obviously, David is what ties everyone together here. How did you settle on this lot in particular?
Well, they all had some connection or affiliation in some way with Shine, or my process with Shine. So there was obviously David himself, but then Daniel Johns had invited David to work with him on Emotion Sickness, and record that with Silverchair back in those days. And they just formed a tremendous connection with each other. And so a part of I thought, what if I could bring them back together again? And it just turned into this absolutely beautiful, impromptu sort of improvisation of the two of them over a piano that was just really a life memory for me. It was so emotive and so moving. So that was involving Daniel was an integral part of it. And I think, because I think of Daniel as one of our living national treasures, as a musician. And then Simon Tedeschi, as a child prodigy, his hands had appeared for the young David in Shine. So he was a natural fit. And Ben Folds was living in Adelaide and married to an Adelaide girl and had his twins here and spent a number of years here. So we became friends during that period as well. So there was that connection too. So that really led me to sort of contemplate all four of these people and their process and their, individual approaches to their musical discipline that they have. And they're just, each of them has such a fascinating story to tell, which I've interwoven. So it's like a collective portrait. And at the same time, we see their portraits being actually created by an artist who happens to be married to Simon Tedeschi.
Yes.
She was a natural part of that too. And it's a journey into the musical mind, and a contemplation on the process.
Now, you just mentioned it there, but seeing the final moment of this film between Dan and David sitting at the piano, it's a purely magical meeting of these magnificent minds. What was it like to witness this for you and to observe this creativity? Because people would pay a lot of money to see that live.
Well, it's a life memory for me, I have to say, because it was so moving. And at one point, we had 4 cameras operating, myself and Jet and 2 other camera people from different angles, and Daniel stopped at one point and looked around and said, what is happening? And I looked around and we were all in tears. I mean, it was so powerful. And Daniel was crying. And it's hard to convey. There was just some moment of connection that was irreplaceable and unrepeatable, and totally unplanned, and that was astonishing experience.
I can't wait for everyone to see this and to see that moment in the film. Is there anyone in particular who you would have liked to have had in the film who couldn't be in it for one reason or another?
Well, I mean, look, at one stage it was going to fan out into other areas and with other musicians, but COVID put paid to all of that. Because I started shooting back in 2021, and a lot has happened since then. And really, I ended up with all this amazing footage of these 4 people, and I thought the story has to be in here somewhere. I had 800 pages of transcripts, and so eventually, as will happen in the documentary process, you search and you search and you find the threads that can connect and interweave, and that's so that was the journey. In a way, it was purer for being just focused on the 4 of them and Laura Bell's painting.
Yes. Yeah.
And a youth orchestra that David Helfgott plays with,
Yeah.
and the inspirational teacher that leads them. So there are so many other little avenues through the story.
Now, I'm curious to know where this painting is now, because I don't think it's revealed at the end what actually happens with this painting.
Oh, the painting that's created. I don't know. I guess it's in Laurie Bell's studio.
Yeah.
It's a good thought.
Yeah. It's a good movie poster right there.
Well, we've used some artwork of Laurie Bell's on our poster.
I guess one other thing that brought me so much joy while watching this film was seeing David and Gillian's relationship still going so strong after all these years. What a beautiful relationship they had, and I was saddened to hear that Gillian has since passed and that the film is dedicated to her. At what point of the filmmaking process did Gillian pass, and did she get to see any of it?
Sadly, no. But it was certainly part of my sense of urgency in getting the filming was that, she was 91.
Yeah.
So she was an amazing woman, quite amazing.
Now, I just have one more question here, which I end all of my podcast episodes on, and I was very, very aware of the time and that we were going over there, but I would like to finish it just with this one question, and then I'll wrap it up. But it's a question that I ask all of my podcast guests at the end of the episode. But have you seen any Australian films lately that have stood out for you? I know you're a big supporter of the Adelaide Film Festival. Did you catch anything there?
I loved Mutiny in Heaven, which is the story of the Nick Cave and the birthday party. Another musical documentary like The Musical Mind, but so different in the sense of all this sort of incredible archival footage and their rough and tumble journey to achieve something out of nothing was absolutely fantastic. Brilliantly executed. A world in which the blurrier and more obscure the image is, the better it gets.
Yes.
So much so that they were doing that even with, the Ian White, I think the director, had, decided to, any recent interviews that they shot had to be sort of obliterated and deteriorated to fit the rest of the film. Yes. So, I mean, anyway, it's an incredibly powerful story. Of and more amazing musical minds. Let's face it.
Yeah,
extraordinary person.
I'm really glad that you got to mention that film. It's fantastic. Scott, I can't thank you enough for joining the Cinema Australia podcast and for sharing your incredible stories with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. It's been terrific. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks for listening. Find all the latest Australian film news at cinemaaustralia.com.au. You can follow Cinema Australia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok.